I think of the ocean as this space that has been kind of a metaphor for freedom, and it still is that. You know, it is a place that people go to escape rules and escape government and escape other people because it's so expansive. But those very allures of the space are what has made the ocean a scary place.
Don't take photos. Don't take photos. So I put the camera down.
Few places on the planet are as lawless as the high seas. The ocean is a place of amazing beauty, but it's also this dystopian realm where severe inhumanities occur, and often with impunity.
Over.
What you realize when you're in that void or in that expanse is that most of that space is ungoverned and ungovernable. There are few laws, and what laws exist are murky and overlapping and contradictory. Laws are only as good as their enforcement, and the enforcement mechanisms for any of the laws are anemic at best. You have human trafficking, sea slavery, abuse of stowaways, weapons trafficking. When the UN looked at it in 2009 and they interviewed Cambodian deckhands, over 50% of them had witnessed murder. A lot of the forced labor that end up on these fishing boats are trafficked migrants and are very poor and easily taken advantage of. One mariner summed it up as, this line of work is like jail with a salary, except the salary is not guaranteed. We in the West would like to think that things are progressively getting better, and in many ways they are, but in this space, things are arguably getting worse. Over 99% of crimes that occur out there go unreported. And there's not a huge point in reporting them because it's never clear who would actually do anything with that information. I think if there's anything to be learned about human nature from the Outlaw Ocean, it's that we all have this visceral capacity to behave in ways that we thought civilization had stamped out. There's a vanishingly thin line between civilization and the lack of it. And I think the exploration of this frontier is an attempt to look at how thin that line is and what's on the other side. So my name is Urbina, and first let me apologize for not being able to attend the event in a live fashion. I think what you may have watched or may soon watch is a short video that Google made that attempts to give a broad sense of what the Outlaw Ocean is about. And my intention here was to elaborate on that a bit more and to try to set the IUU discussion that is the focus of your concerns today in a broader context of the Outlaw Ocean perspective about a wider diversity of concerns, be they labor, human rights, or environmental, that exist offshore, and how all those concerns are important to keep in mind when working on IUU issues. That core concept is one of the goals of the reporting, and so I'd just like to make that point again now. Forgive me the noisy surroundings, such as life in COVID quarantine days. This is my office behind my house in Washington, D.C. So what is the Outlaw Ocean and how does it relate to IUU? The Outlaw Ocean is a body of journalism that created, which takes a look at the offshore realm globally, sort of 2/3 of the planet that is water, and views it anthropologically, if you will, as a frontier, a place where over 50 million people work, a place where 90% of what we consume comes across this realm, and as such, it's essential to the global economy. This realm that also produces 50% of the oxygen we breathe. So a hugely important space where there's a lot of activity going on, and from which you rarely hear stories and reporting. You hear academic reports about it, but you rarely hear much journalism from it. One of the core goals of the reporting was to look at IUU and consider the concerns related to better management of fisheries, the concerns related to ocean plastics and ocean and species depletion, acidification, sea level rise, all these issues, but also look at what other activities are happening out there that connect all under an umbrella of a sort of dire lack of governance, a dire lack of law enforcement. The core sense is that while there are laws on the books, often enforcement is anemic, and that's partially because of the sheer size of the space and the expense and logistical challenges of policing that realm. The sort of broadening of the taxonomy of concerns that exist out there. In the end, at the end of the book, and we have now embarked on a new round of 5 years of reporting, sought to frame illegal fishing, unreported and unregulated fishing in the context of human rights concerns such as the murder of stowaways and sea slavery, or the situation in which you have captive or debt bonded or forced labor, child labor on fishing vessels typically around the world, especially in the South China Sea, but elsewhere as well. Murder at sea that goes with impunity and sort of the unregulated nature of private maritime security guards, some of them on fishing vessels, others on merchant vessels, and sort of whose job it is to police those men, and when they kill or hurt people, whose responsibility and what protocol exists for finding out whether that was a legitimate or illegitimate use of violence. The intentional dumping of oil at sea and other types of dumping at sea rather than just spills, and sort of the problem of magic pipes and the unleashing of pollutants in the water in a form that's fairly sizable and largely hard to police. Illegal whaling, the abandonment of seafarers on fishing and merchant vessels, whereby companies go belly up, they go bankrupt overnight, and they stop paying wages, they stop communicating with the workers on their ships, and those workers are left to fend for themselves. All these issues add up to a description of a realm, the offshore space, that has a lot of various concerns and largely stem from a shortfall in jurisdiction, in enforcement mechanisms, in money set aside to enforce what laws exist, and also, generally speaking, a lack of transparency and accountability in supply chains, seafood supply chains on behalf of companies, but also in fishing fleets and their willingness or ability to report what they're doing when and with whom. So part of the reporting has segued into the IUU issue in the form of promoting better transparency and accountability of what happens on vessels in the fishing fleet, especially in the part of the supply chain that's between the dock and the hook, if you will, or the long line or the net. And so the reporting has worked quite recently, and there are some large stories coming out soon related to things that Global Fishing Watch and Trigmac Tracking and some other sort of small NGOs or private firms are doing to try to step up accountability and transparency and tracking of fishing vessels in places like the South China Sea that are engaged not just in IUU, but also engaged in other sorts of crimes like dumping and sea slavery and murder. Only by way of getting countries primarily, but also companies, to embrace the notion that it's in everyone's interest to have better tracking of where vessels are, who's working on those vessels, what hours are they working, these sorts of basic things that other on-land fleets already have imposed on them now being imposed on fishing fleets, only through better enforcement and provisions requiring those things of fishing fleets is there any chance of better policing. You can't counter something unless you can first count it, and we can't really even count the extent of crime and violence and illegal fishing until we actually have unique identifiers on fishing vessels, VMS and AIS, mandatory systems, onboard cameras, crew manifests, these sorts of provisions that would help provide more oversight and tracking of these vessels. So in a broad sense of the term, this is the outlook of the Outlaw Ocean and how it connects to IUU generally, and is especially relevant to IUU as it plays out in the South China Sea and as relates to other crimes. And if you want to learn more, please do send me an email. I'm at ian@theoutlawocean.com, or read the book, and I'd be happy to engage. Thanks so much for having me.